Today, I will be your moderator. I'm Claudia Giacovelli, and I'm joined by an exciting lineup of speakers, and also by my UNEP colleagues, Laurence and Laura, who are already online, and that will be helping me to run this session. In the meantime, let me just take you through the agenda for today. It's a very busy agenda. We will go through, as I mentioned, the main objective of today's webinar is really to introduce you and make you more familiar with the e-learning courses that we offer and on life cycle thinking. And before we go right deep into the courses themselves, we will hear from experts in life cycle assessment about what is life cycle thinking. We will hear from an experienced professor that have taken up the courses as part of his curricula offering, and we will have an opportunity for question and answers. So with that, I will pass the presenter role to Laura, and we can start with our first speaker, which is Laurence Milay-Canal, that is UNEP team leader of the Lifecycle Unit. Thank you, Laurence, for joining us today, and we will hear from you a bit the context.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and thanks everybody for being here. This is just a very short introduction to take just a little second to set the scene and share a bit of background on the Life Cycle Initiative and where these e-learning courses are hosted. So the Life Cycle Initiative is formed by many partners, including some of those that are behind the development of the e-learning courses on life cycle thinking. The Life Cycle Initiative was launched in 2002 by UNEP, together with many partners, including the CTAC, the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry. This was in recognition of the importance of life cycle thinking and life cycle approaches to achieve sustainable development. So as you can see here, the vision of the Life Cycle Initiative is that we can contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and sustainable development in general faster and more efficiently by targeting the key drivers of impact. That's what the life cycle perspective gives us, and also to address the potential trade-offs with life cycle approaches. So to do this, the Life Cycle Initiative is delivering on three main program areas, which you can see in these three colored boxes at the bottom of your screens. So at the top, we want to mainstream the use of life cycle thinking into key areas of global decision and policy making of sustainable development in order to show positive impacts towards achievement of the global goals through partnerships. The second box in red is about the work that we're doing on developing life cycle capacity. And our ambition here is to have trained by 2022 at least 2,500 policymakers, decision makers, LCA practitioners on the ways that life cycle knowledge can be best used to enhance the effectiveness of decisions or policies. And on this area, of course, is what is the main focus of what we will be discussing today on the e-modules. But before we go to the e-modules, just this third area, last but not least, as we usually say, the area on life cycle knowledge, because everything, and this is at the basis, because it's the basis of everything that the decisions we're supporting have to be rooted in robust science and robust life cycle knowledge in this case. So and in terms of life cycle knowledge, we're aiming to offer a solution to access all life cycle assessment databases globally in an interoperable way, alongside characterization factors for impact assessment. You can already access a lot of this through GLAD, the Global LCA Data Access Network, which is one of the key deliverables as well of the Life Cycle Initiative. But of course, today we're focusing on the e-learning, so we'll get there. But before that, please, if we can move to the next slide, to acknowledge the significant contributions that our partners have provided through the years to bring the initiative to you. Well, of course, there's a lot of in-kind contributions, but we also need to specifically acknowledge the financial contributions. And here you have the funding partners of the Life Cycle Initiative. Of course, we also highlight the European Commission in particular, as the European Commission has been a key funder for the e-learning modules that we will see today. So with that, we can now move to the next slide, and Claudia, is over to you to present our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurence. Thank you very much. And with that great introduction, we can really see the support of the life cycle community and the fact that, in fact, all these partners are really behind the creation, the development of the e-learning courses. And with that, as I mentioned before we dive into the courses content, I would like to invite Pippa Notten. Pippa is the director of TGH ThinkSpace in South Africa, and she will take us a bit through and she will give us a bit more understanding of what we mean when we say life cycle thinking. Over to you, Pippa.
Thank you, Claudia. Hello, everyone. Of course, life cycle thinking will be very well known to some of you. For this webinar, it was interesting looking at the poll now. It's quite a mixed audience. So, for the academics that we've been sort of targeted and invited, they would know life cycle thinking very well. After all, they're looking at this webinar with the view of maybe incorporating them into their courses. But then we also anticipate attendees, that would be interested in taking the courses themselves. So this would be a new topic. And of course, life cycle thinking is the very topic of the e-learning courses. So this quick overview gives me the opportunity to preview some of the material to you. So all of these visuals on the slides are taken from the courses, and hopefully introduces you to the topic, but then also provides a teaser for you to go and explore more on your own. So the challenge of achieving sustainable development requires a new way of thinking. The vision of the Sustainable Development Goals provides an overall direction and a shared destination, but how do we get there? In particular, how do we deal with the conflicts, synergies, and trade-offs that we inevitably encounter when trying to make decisions that advance the SDGs? Sorry, we needed another click there, Laura. I forgot. There we go. So we need this life cycle thinking to explore these synergies and trade-offs that inevitably arise. For example, so SDG 7 has the goal of affordable and clean energy for all, which will require expanding energy infrastructure. But the policy decision on how to achieve this needs to be decided within the context of SDG 13, taking action against climate change. So how do we manage this, since building energy infrastructure gives rise to greenhouse gas emissions? Science-based assessments, such as life cycle assessment, are key to monitoring progress and supporting the decisions, in this case, to increase energy access while minimizing greenhouse gas emissions. So in these sort of assessments, we need a new way of thinking, a way of taking the whole environmental, social, and economic implications into account. So, for example, a life cycle sustainability assessment might endeavor to take into account, amongst other things, climate change, water scarcity, human health, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, job creation, workers' rights, and economic benefits. So the goal of life cycle thinking is to make explicit the potential conflicts, synergies, and trade-offs amongst all of these. We also need to be aware that decisions taken at one stage of a product life cycle might have consequences for another stage of the life cycle. By taking into account the whole life cycle, we can detect hidden costs and evaluate trade-offs explicitly, not only between the different environmental impacts, but also between environmental and socioeconomic impacts, but also between product value chain stages. A life cycle perspective allows us to identify and so focus improvements on those stages of the life cycle that have the highest environmental and social impacts, what we call the hotspots. So what is this product life cycle or product value chain that I'm referring to? Essentially, what this means is that we follow all the stages that a product goes through over its service life, from the extraction of raw materials through processing, manufacturing, distribution, to use and recycling, and final disposal. So why do we need this life cycle perspective? It helps us to avoid burden shifting. That is, so when we make a change, be it a change in the design of a product or a change in policy to get consumers to act in a particular way, that may solve the problem we were focusing on, but create another problem somewhere else. So for example, a policy to require retreading of vehicle tires therefore avoiding disposal problem of used tires, has the potential to increase emissions from the use phase of cars, since fuel consumption increases with increased rolling resistance in cars. So that's the example of this idea of this burden shifting that we want to be explicit when we analyze these systems with a life cycle perspective. And this life cycle perspective is more important than ever in today's global supply chains, where decisions taken, for example, by a brand owner in the design of their product might have environmental and social implications at different places around the world, needing to be sensitive to local contexts and environments. So broadly speaking, life cycle thinking, which encompasses tools such as life cycle assessment and life cycle management and life cycle costing, provides a means to ensure that improvements at one stage in the life cycle are not creating greater cumulative impacts at other stages, and that decisions taken improve the system as a whole. Thank you. That's so next slide. And to take you on to Brett to take you more through the courses.
Thank you, Pippa. Thank you very much. And that's great, really, to give all of us a really deep understanding of what do we mean by life cycle thinking, this idea of avoiding burden shifting between life cycle stages and this value chain approach that really is important, especially in today's lives. So I'd like to invite Brett Cohen, Director of TGH ThinkSpace in South Africa, to illustrate for us what are the e-learning courses that we have developed, and what do they contain, and what we can really learn after we have taken them. Over to you, Brett.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. If we can move to the next slide, Lara. So we have 3 courses that are available in the group of courses that are on offer by the Life Cycle Initiative. And I'm going to be, as Claudia said, talk you through the content of the courses, the structure of the courses, how to get onto the courses, how to register for them, and finally present you with some as to how you might integrate them into other teaching curricula, both in an academic context or in the private sector or in government. You can see on your screen we have 3 courses available on the website. The first of these is an introductory course, and many of the visuals which Pippa presented to you come from this introductory course, which really provides all around life cycle thinking. These courses have been translated into 5 languages, English, Spanish, and Arabic. And so that's the first course that's available. The second one looks at life cycle thinking and policy making, and that one's available in English and Spanish, as is the third course, life cycle thinking and decision making, which is also available in English and Spanish. So all of the courses follow a somewhat similar structure in that they consist of a combination of effectively 3 elements. The first of these is the video lessons. So all of the material is presented through videos, narrated videos with a combination of graphics, and in some of the later courses also a presenter and participants. Then at the regular places in the course, there are quizzes. And finally, there are links to additional reading resources for students that want to learn more about the topics. Now, all of the videos are available for download, which increases the flexibility as to how, as I'll illustrate to you a little bit later on. Now, all the courses are free to use, as has been said already, and will remain free. So I think that's a big selling point of these courses. And at the end of the courses, completion certificates are issued. You'll see on the top right-hand side, I've given you a sample of one of the completion certificates. And that is, again, a really strong point of these courses, as we'll explain later on. So all of the courses are available at the URL that's on your screen, www.learnlifecycle.com. We will be putting this up a number of times through this webinar. And if you happen to still miss that link, there is also a link to the course registration page from the Lifecycle Initiatives homepage. You'll be able to find it from there. So it's quite easy to find the courses when you start looking for them. Just to go into a bit more depth about the content of the 3 courses on offer, as I mentioned, the first one provides the basis for understanding the concepts and the ideas behind life cycle thinking. And there are 4 lessons that make up this course. The first of these provides you with an introduction to life cycle thinking. What is it about? What is it for? What are the key concepts? And then lessons 2, 3, and 4 start to go into a little bit more detail about how it can be applied to certain contexts. So the first one of these looks at driving change in public policies. The next one, lesson 3, talks to driving change in business. And then the final one is around driving sustainable lifestyles. And really the idea here is to give the broad overview of this material. Next slide, please, Laura. And if you go on to the second course, so life cycle thinking policy making, as the title says, goes into a little bit more detail on this particular topic. Now, the courses have been designed to be standalone. So lesson 1 effectively repeats some of the concepts that are contained in the introductory course. It doesn't do away with the need to do the introductory course, but it does help for the course to be standalone. And there we introduce the concepts around life cycle thinking, but particularly focused on policymakers. And then lessons 2, 3, and 4 look at demonstrating further concepts in the context of particular application areas. So lesson 2 looks at life cycle thinking in transport policy, where we explore case studies such as the trade-off between or the differences in pursuing hydrogen vehicles versus electric vehicles, and look at what are some of the questions that policymakers need to look at when deciding what kind of vehicle policy to pursue. We then, in lesson 3, look at waste policy, where we look at examples of plastic bags versus other options for shopping versus for groceries. And we also look at options for waste management and how life cycle thinking can inform policy decisions around those. And then lesson 4 looks at agriculture and food policy. And one of the things we look at there is what are the implications of pursuing certain policies that support different dietary choices and impacts. And then finally, in the 5th lesson, we look at what potential future applications are there for life cycle thinking in policy making. The course follows a similar structure to the second, but targets specifically business decision makers. And so lesson 1 again introduces some of the concepts, but again for the target audience of business decision makers. And then lessons 2 to 5 again take the case study approach to conveying information and concepts and ideas and tools. So in lesson 2, we look at product design, and we look there at how life cycle thinking has been used to inform products such as Apple's mini computer and Patagonia clothing. And Pippa's going to go into some more detail on that later in the webinar. We then, in lesson 3, look at how we can explore the impacts across the whole value chain of a product or service. And there we use the Levi jeans example, which is a well-known example. And again, Pippa's going to give you some snapshots of these different assessments. Lesson 4 takes a look at the application of life cycle thinking by industry associations, where individual organizations don't have the resources perhaps to do their own life cycle assessments or apply life cycle thinking or services. They might come together as a group and then conduct analyses on their products. And there we use the example of clay bricks. Finally, in lesson 5, or the final case study lesson, looks at product environmental footprints and eco-labels. So how can we gather life cycle information to communicate to consumers around the impact of their choices. And there's some very interesting work that goes on that topic. And then similar in lesson 6, we have a look at what potential future applications of life cycle thinking there are. So that's the summary of the 3 courses and their contents. And then if we move to the next slide, I'll just demonstrate to you quickly how you actually go about registering for them. So this is a snapshot of the landing page for the registrations. You'll see I've highlighted at the top www.learnlifecycle.com. And all of the courses, the 3 courses, and in the 5 different languages for the introductory course and English and Spanish for the other 2 courses, all contained on this website. So there are 2 pages. There's a 1 and a 2 at the bottom. And you choose the course that you want to register for. So in this case, I've chosen the Introduction to Life Cycle, indicated by the arrow on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. So the next slide, you'll see what happens if you, you'll see a button which says Enroll for Free. This is the landing page, and there's actually an entry which you can watch on this landing page. And if you click on the Enroll for Free, on the next slide, you'll see the very basic information that you have to enter. So it's really first name, last name, gender, country, email, and password. So it's just to give us a sense of who's taking the courses and where they're taking the courses in terms of country. So once you've filled that in, the next slide, you'll see your landing page for the course, which you can come back to at any time. So just to note that there's no fixed time period in which you need to finish the course. Obviously, if you do it within a finite period of time, build on each other and the learning experience is enhanced, but you don't have to do it within the space of a week, for example. So on the screen on the left-hand side, you'll see it says block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4, and those align with the themes which I told you this course covers. And whatever you click on, if you move to the next slide where we've expanded the block 1 offering, you can see the combination of lectures, which are video lectures, which I mentioned. There are the additional resources. There's some links to UN initiatives. And finally, the self-check quiz and the download materials. And whatever you click on the left-hand side obviously appears on the right-hand side. Very and hopefully quite self-explanatory. At the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the next button, which allows you to go on to the next module. So just on working through the modules, before I move on to this slide, is you can go back on material. Obviously, it's preferable to go sequentially through the material because every lesson builds on the previous one. But if the student chooses to re-watch a video to gather some of the key facts or would like to do the quiz again, maybe they didn't get a pass mark on the quiz, any of the items on the left hand it can be visited again, but the interface, this is track your progress through. So it will say you 80% through this, it will give you an indicator of how far you've gone through the course. It's possible to track your progress even if you revisit aspects of it. So that's the base, very simple, but a wealth of information that's contained in each of these courses. So as the last part of my presentation, I just wanted to throw out some ideas as to how people might choose to use these courses in different contexts. And as we saw from the poll, we really have a nice combination here of people from government, people from academia, private sector. We've seen a couple of training organizations, etc., etc. And people might choose to use it in different ways depending on where they come from. So first of all, we focus on incorporation into teaching curricula. So that's for the, and we saw 4 areas or 4 ways in which the course could be used as part of teaching curricula. The most one of these is in courses that actually focus on life cycle thinking or life cycle analysis. So this might be maybe a third-year course or a fourth-year course where the need is to get into the real details of LCA or life cycle thinking. And what we've heard from academics is that there is value in asking students to do the course up front of starting to do their semester course in life cycle thinking or life cycle analysis as a basis. So that will ensure that everybody coming into the course has the basic concepts, some knowledge of the basic concepts, which they can then build on as they throughout the rest of the semester course. So that's the first application. The second part of a broader sustainability or environmental course or environmental engineering course, where there's a desire to cover life cycle thinking, there's a desire to cover environmental technologies, there's a desire to cover socioeconomic impacts, and then you could use this course, this one or more of these life cycle thinking courses as the standalone element of the broader sustainability course to cover that particular material. The third area which we thought could find application is where you step out of the sustainability environmental sphere and you move into business and policy schools, where people aren't necessarily studying environment as a core component of their work, but really should be informed about the need for life cycle thinking to underpin decisions they make around business and policy considerations. So again, similar to the first example, one could send students away, ask them to do perhaps the business course, perhaps the policy course, and use that information as a framework for informing the way they think about their day jobs, if you like. And then the final area used in teaching curricula is that an academic might choose to just dip into certain components of the course. So because all the videos and scripts and reading can be recorded and used again, used standalone or placed onto your own intranet, if you're worried about bandwidth issues, you could say to students, just
Brett, sorry,
watch
this is
video.
incredibly interesting. We just have to wrap it up.
Okay, I have a last slide. Thank you. So it could be that you could access elements of downloads into your courses. And distribute them as and where needed. My last slide, if I can quickly, Laura, and then I will finish up, Claudia. So we, again, focusing on audiences here, people working in government departments or in public procurement could take a look at the life cycle thinking introduction and policy making courses and use those to get a grounding for understanding how life cycle thinking can inform policy design, implementation, and public procurement practices. The private sector can look at life cycle thinking case studies that we offer in the business decision-making course and get some real-life examples of life cycle thinking in practice and use it as an element for further education and training for employees. And finally, training centers, those sitting outside of academia, can use it way to what we said for academics. Just one last point, just click once, please, Laura, is participants who have completed all the modules will be automatically receive a certificate of completion. It's very useful in that lecturers don't have to go and grade assignments or check that students have engaged with the course. They can request that, and then they know that the students have through that the course. So that's it from me, and back to you, Claudia. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Brett. And we have your presentation has really throughout the interest of the audience, we had lots of question and answers, both in the chat and the Q&A box. Thanks everybody for interacting so actively. Just remember to post your question in the Q&A box, and we will address them either now in the Q&A section, in the Q&A part of this webinar. So I will ask Pippa and Brett to put their videos back up, and I will ask actually also Laura, if you move to the next slide, we will go to the Q&A section. So Pippa and Brett will join us for this section, and I will ask also Laurence some questions, because there were some that I'm sure that Laurence will be eager to answer himself as well. So we received quite a bit of questions, and thank you, Brett. It's incredible. This course is indeed, as the audience was mentioning, it's really the right time to learn about the existence of these courses and take these courses, both for a content perspective, but also because of COVID has really put us through a situation in which distance learning and remote working has really become the norm. So the fact of having the possibility to enroll in these free self-paced courses of life cycle thinking is a great opportunity. And as you mentioned, they will remain free. We don't plan to put them available against a fee. So that is really great. As you mentioned, they are available in many different languages, and they provide people with a certificate at the end. So yes, there are some assessment questions to be taken at the end, and we will provide a certificate. But let me go to the questions. So Marta, maybe this question I will ask to Laurence. Marta was asking whether these courses at any point consider the regulatory restraints, for example, the EU procurement law, as this solution, and whether the solution provided in the courses basically are compatible with the EU law. Was this ever checked?
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. And I actually provided already a quick answer in the chat. So the thing is, the courses are an introduction to life cycle thinking, and maybe also Pippa and Brett will want to complement. They are not focused on any specific regulation, although, of course, for instance, the use of the product and organization environmental footprint of the European Commission and their potential use in legislation are mentioned and discussed, but they don't go into the specifics of any specific rules or tools that are used in this regulation or others. So their use in regulations is discussed, but it doesn't go into a specific one. But Brett and Pippa, you've also been behind that course, so if you want to complement, please jump in.
Thank you. I'd like to ask another question to Pippa, specifically from Dennis from Kenya. He wanted to know whether these programs and life cycle approach, in fact, can be applicable to a community setup, to implement improvement in a community setup.
I'm not entirely clear on the question, but I think absolutely life cycle thinking is applicable in any context, because you're thinking through your problem and your consequences of your decision. So it applies absolutely within a community as much as it would within an industry context. So yes.
Great.
Maybe a close example of the sector of what sort of community problem, but any problem can improve with systematic life cycle thinking. So your value chain and your various impacts, potential impacts.
Thank you, Pippa. And Brett, one question from you, from Hélène. We have some questions already answered to this regarding the Q&A box, but for the benefit of everybody, there were some people were wondering, basically, there is each course is formed by various modules. More or less, how long will it take to go through one course and one module in particular, if this can be extrapolated?
Thanks, Claudia. I think if one wants to do the course properly, probably about 4 hours to do one of the courses, and then it's roughly divided between the modules or the lessons within the course. That includes a bit of extra reading as well. They do vary a bit, but I would say around 4 hours.
4 hours, okay, great. And then if we add the reading material, etc., of course, one can go much more in depth.
Yes, that's correct. There's a wealth of reading information presented in each course, in each lesson.
Thank you very much. I will then thank you so much, Brett, Pippa, and Laurence for this interaction. I will, because we are a bit pressed with time, I would like to move on to our next speakers, and we travel to Brazil. Welcome, Diogo. Welcome, Diogo. Diogo Aparecido Lopes Silva is a professor at the University Federal de São Carlos in Brazil. Diogo has been a big fan of these courses, and he adopted them as part of his teaching already some time back. We have now actually, through his cooperation, translated even the introductory course in Portuguese. So thank you for that, Diogo. And I will leave you the floor to take us through a bit your experience and the feedback that you have received from your students.
Okay, thank you for this kind introduction, Claudia. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you. Also, my special thanks to UNEP for the opportunity to be here sharing with you my experience in using the life cycle thinking courses for teaching. So I will share in the next slide some experience in applying for the courses, university curriculum, with a focus on the first translated course to Portuguese, the Introduction to Life Cycle Thinking. So in this slide, the main question here is how to integrate the LCT online course into the university curriculum. Please, next slide. Well, a good way to answer this question is starting looking at these two motivators in terms of university and our professor perspective. Would you like to teach LCT topics, or do you give classes? If so, you can move for steps 3, 4, and 5 as follows. Please click on the slide, Laura. Thank you. In step 3, you could talk with your students to do the LCT course. It will take like 4 hours to finish the course. And at the end of this process, in step 4, you can ask the students to share with you the certificates of this online course, to integrate them as part of the students' regular evaluations. Last but not least, you could select a specific topic of your interest to propose academic projects based on seminars, workshops, case studies, and etc. For step 5 of this slide, let's see some real examples in the next ones. Next slide, please. Okay. Before, yes, thank you. Here, I show you some practical examples that we did in last year at UFSCar, my institution where I work as professor. I propose to use eco-innovation tools to analyze the business models of some small Brazilian companies. Lifecycle thinking was an important tool for these academic projects. This example shows a business model evaluation. We compared the current state scenario, as you can see in the current Canvas business model on this slide, with a new business model based on metrics under investigation, like risks, costs, and environmental concerns. This case study was a company that produces clothes, and the innovation principles and tools helped the students to understand the importance of the life cycle thinking in generation of a new business model that uses recycled textiles materials to produce low-budget clothes. On this example, we have used mainly the tools that we have studied in module number 3, as Brett previously because topic 3, we studied about the applications of life cycle thinking in business model evaluations. Next slide, please. Okay. Here, this is another example. We focus on affinities gym. For this case study, we did in-depth evaluation for the material and energy input-output flows. The academic project was to apply principles and calculations with material flow analysis methodology, which is another important tool based on life cycle thinking. Many scenarios and indicators were modeled, as you can see in the bottom part of this screen. And it took like 20 hours of classes in a simulation software tool. As you can see on the top of this screen, please click on the screen, please. Laura. Yes. And here's just a screenshot of the software tool that you used at that time. And after that, the students have understood the main hotspots and suggested some alternative scenarios, as for example, proposing for the fitness center to give more outdoor activities to reduce energy consumption, as well as the suggestion of reducing printing paper consumptions by using online forms at the gym, and so on. But the most important thing in these two academic examples is not the final case study results, but the right understanding of students on how to put in practice life cycle thinking. This is the most important thing here when we are teaching topics related to life cycle thinking. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have some tips for better use of the life cycle thinking course in your classes. We have the following step-by-step activities to summarize what I have covered so far. Please take a look and make your questions and notes. I will be glad to discuss with you your feedbacks in the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. And in my last part of this presentation, I will share with you some results of a survey that I did during the last year and beginning of this year with my students. The goal here was to gather data and information about the perception of the quality of the life cycle thinking online courses. Next slide, please. Well, here we have the respondents profile. We had a total of 43 responses distributed in 21 responses from undergraduate students in production engineering and 22 MBA students responses in environmental management and sustainability course. Both of them are courses managed by my institution here in Brazil, UFSCar. And the results were evaluated by using a cervical model that we'll explain a little bit in next slide, please. Next slide, please. For those who do not know the cervical model, I will make a summary of what was evaluated here, okay? We had 23 questions for the survey, and they were organized in 5 quality categories for evaluation of the life cycle thinking online course. We had the tangible elements. For example, we had questions asking about the use of the online platform that Brett already showed on this presentation. And we asked for the students if the platform was intuitive for people or not, whether the video and audio resources were satisfactory or not, and the other questions on that aspect. Next, we had questions about readability and responsiveness elements. For example, we had questions if the background materials matches what was promised in the scope of the course or not. And the same structure was organized for evaluating assurance and empathy categories of the model. Results of the cervical analysis showed negative scores, as you can see on this screen, which means that the quality perceptions were higher than the initial students' expectations of the scores. So it was a very good result, because basically it means that the 43 students that have attended this course were very satisfied. Therefore, I hope I have convinced you until here about the quality of these courses offered by UNEP, and that you will also take the course and use it in your classes as I did, as I tried to explain in my presentation. Next slide, please. Here we have some more positive students' feedbacks. Please take a look on the descriptions. We can see here that some students mentioned the positive feedbacks in terms of expanding the network, knowledge on the topic, and so on. Next slide. Next slide, please. So here I finished my presentation. Thank you. Obrigado.
Thank you very much, Diogo. This is fascinating to see, and always a pleasure, of course, for us to hear that the feedback after taking the courses, it's more positive than what the expectation originally was. And with that, we will have another question and answer session live in a minute. Before, I would like to pass the floor to Pippa again, because Diogo has presented to us how he integrated basically these courses as part of his teaching curricula. So it becomes really a prerequisite before taking his class for students to complete the certificate, to be able to start the class with a standard understanding of what life cycle thinking is, life cycle assessment, etc. So, and presenting a certificate to him prior to beginning his classes is the prerequisite. Now, if you are not an academic or you are a training center, etc., what is the value of these courses? And Pippa will take us through some application of case studies to explain you that. Pippa, over to you. Oh, and before we do that, I would like to, because there is quite a lot of interest, actually would like to ask everybody, the Life Cycle Initiative, we are looking for institutions, in fact, that are willing to incorporate the courses into their teaching, whether you are, as I was saying, in academia, a university, a research center, a training center. If you can write your email address in the Q&A box, we will contact you, and we'll be happy to discuss further with you how this can be done. So please do write your Q&A boxes if you are interested to incorporate these courses into your service offering. And if we move to the next slide, then I will ask Pippa to take us through some of the case studies.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. So as Claudia said, just in case we kind of made it look that this was only useful for teaching, I'm going to just pick out two of the case studies from the courses to show you that it's equally valuable for you if you're an industry or a government agency. Next slide, please. So, of course, life cycle thinking is only taught at universities and in curricula to equip graduates to go out into their future jobs with the insights that life cycle thinking brings. So in particular, as product designers, industry decision makers, and policymakers. So within industry, life cycle thinking is used, amongst other things, to design more sustainable products and improve processes, as well as to understand product value chain impacts, so as to identify the opportunities for improvement and address the risks. And then similarly, life cycle thinking is an invaluable tool for policymakers to identify opportunities to maximize co-benefits on policies, as well as to guard against interventions intended to move businesses and consumers to more sustainable practices, leading to unintended consequences. So next slide, please. So how would a designer in this example, computers, use life cycle thinking to improve the sustainability of their product? So this is an example of Apple's Mac Mini computer taken from the life cycle thinking in business decision-making course. So life cycle thinking helps with material selection by evaluating the life cycle impacts of the materials that make up the product. LCA studies can provide a designer with information to choose those materials with the least environmental impacts over their life cycle. So particularly looking at their potential of materials to be reused or recycled at end of life. So Apple's Mac Mini is far less material intensive than a standard desktop computer. The Mac Mini uses 68% less plastic than the previous generation, particularly with the decision to go with aluminium for the body, because it's a highly recyclable material with a high recycling value. And that minimizes material waste at the computer's end of life. And this, together with the extremely compact design, makes the Mac Mini one of the most material efficient desktop computers available. Next slide, please. So when evaluating climate impact over the life cycle of their product, Apple found that the use phase is a particular hotspot in a computer due to electricity use when people are running their computers. So because of this, energy efficiency is a key feature in the design of the Mac Mini, with power efficient components and software that intelligently power them down during periods of inactivity. So the result is that Mac Mini outperforms the requirements of the Energy Star program and consumes over 25% less energy than the previous generation of their computers. Next slide, please. So another industry case study, Levi Jeans conducted a life cycle assessment to understand the life cycle impacts associated with a pair of jeans, which required that they engage with their very global supply chain. Next slide, please. What they found was that the highest impacts occur in their supply chain, particularly in cotton and fabric production, as well as in the use of the jeans, with high amounts of water and electricity used due to the numerous times jeans will be washed and dried over their service life. So life cycle thinking showed Levi that the most important thing for them to do to improve the sustainability of their jeans is to work with their suppliers and their customers, providing guidance to customers on how to best care for their jeans so as to reduce water and electricity use, and working with their cotton and fabric suppliers to source sustainably grown cotton and improve the material and energy efficiency of fabric production. Next slide, please. And as final example, this one not from the courses, but from another UNEP project, taking action against single-use plastic products, particularly single-use plastic bags, is high on the agenda of many governments at the moment. So these are 3 reports with another 3 or 4 to come, which give analyses or meta-analyses of life cycle assessment studies to show, looking at single-use plastics and their alternatives of various products, packaging and takeaway, packaging, bottles and bags are these 3 published ones. And these reviews, using life cycle thinking, life cycle assessment studies in particular in this case, show that understanding the impacts of single-use plastic products and their alternatives across their whole life cycle is key to making the right policy choice in the particular context of the country. I think I'm going to end it there, Laura, because we are very tight for time. So I think just you can skip over to the question slide in case there are questions for Diogo, I think is more important.
Thank you so much, Pippa. And yes, thank you also for shortening and keeping back to the time. We are a bit late, but there is quite a lot of interaction that are happening in the Q&A box, and we still have quite a number of participants, more than 200 people online with us. So it means the topic is of great interest. Thank you for coming back with us for the Q&A. So we have received quite a lot of questions, and I will start with one for Diogo from Martin. Diogo, do you think the courses can be valuable as a support to teach other subjects, as for example, eco-labeling, environmental product declaration?
Yes, thanks for the question. Yes, I think so, because the first course, for example, it's very general in terms of the the topics that it covers. So it will give for the students a very good overview of what is life cycle thinking and what are the main tools that we can use for performing, for example, an LCA, an eco design, and so on. So this is very interesting because it's a short course, and after that you can select a topic of your interest, like eco-labeling, for example, and propose a seminar or a academic project for our students. And the students will have a background information and materials to make some searches on internet and read in more details the suggested background materials at the LCT online course about eco-labeling, and I'm sure they will learn so much about on any topic that you have selected for the academic projects. In my case here, I gave some examples for the eco-innovation, but it's the same for eco-labeling or LCA. I believe it's the same structure, and it's feasible as well.
Great. So it means that somehow it provides food for thought for the professors to come up, or for the people that are offering the training to come up with other topics, for example, of connection. And for the students, it provides a really solid platform from which to start looking at materials, etc. Now, to Pippa, there is a question on the materials. So in your examples that you provided, Pippa, the materials take quite prominence prior to process or product design. How about the offerings for materials specific to life cycle thinking? Now, I guess the question, I'm not so clear for the question, hopefully you understand it better than me, but basically I think that in your examples, the material was very, very much prominent in the process and product design. And what about the industry that offers material? Is there an application for life cycle thinking there as well?
I'm not entirely clear on the question. I think the idea of focusing on the materials, so with the life cycle assessment, that was the sort of the breakdown, you know, when you look at your product and you look at all the materials that go into it, and you would then in your model have a life cycle assessment of each material, which then you build up into your life cycle. So you would be taking industries that produce the materials into account in a life cycle assessment study anyway. So when you certainly like there, you'd be looking at what they had with the plastics with high waste, and then you would look at a different. So obviously, if aluminium would have very high production because it is a metal with a lot of energy in its refining and making it in. But you would want to then life cycle assessment would put you in the view of you must find recycled aluminium, which has a very much lower environmental or global warming impact than primary aluminium. So yeah, those sort of material insights come in when you do a life cycle assessment.
Great. And how can we best use life cycle thinking to identify potential synergies to address industrial waste management?
Me again? Or
yes.
So industrial in potential synergy. I mean, I think it's the same thing. It would be looking at, your alternatives and those that reinforce each other and come out with the best system. So it's all about the systems view and systems design. So looking at in industrial waste management, if you can have industrial ecology, another process that uses your waste materials, or it's all around, then quantifying the full system benefits, and in that way you would find the synergies.
Great, thank you so much. And before closing, I would like to ask one more question to Diogo. We are trying to answer to all the questions that you have put in the Q&A box. If we don't get to respond verbally, we'll try to answer in writing. Diogo, the question for you is, how long ago did you start, and what type of courses what type of grades basically do you teach this course? And do you use this course to only undergraduate, or you have a different service offering for your students?
Yes, I use this course in both of the cases for undergraduate students and also in post-graduation courses, MBAs, master, PhD courses. You can use it all these courses for both levels of
So the
academic
results you
degrees.
presented earlier were from both, a combination of feedback from students both
The
from
first
MBA and undergrad.
Yes, the first example for the clothes production was from undergraduate students in production engineering, and the other example in gym, it was from the MBA.
Great, thank you so
Yeah.
much. And with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you all the panelists, all the participants for being with us today. Laura, if we go to the next slide, I would like to reiterate the courses are freely available on the Life Cycle Initiative website. We will make the recording and the PDF of the slides available to you in the next 7 days. So we will circulate a link, and you can also check in the next slide, you will see, you can check our Life Cycle Initiative platforms, social media, Twitter and LinkedIn, for other events that we are organizing in the next coming month on life cycle thinking and life cycle assessment in general. When you close this webinar, you will be redirected. You will see that there is probably you will be redirected to an external site. We have a feedback survey that we would like you to complete. It takes really less than a minute. If you click on the continued, it might be this warning sign. If you click on continue, you will be redirected to the survey feedback to the feedback survey, and we would really appreciate your opinion on the courses and on the webinar. Again, thank you for being with us today, and all the very best. Stay safe, everybody, and take care. See you next time.